In early 2024, a woman in the city of Bogota, Colombia, received an unusual request from a guy who she met on an online dating app. The man said that his friend in Europe was working on a movie script and that she needed some help with dialogue she was writing for one of her characters. He wanted to know if she could take a look and kind of finesse the scenes involving this character a little bit so that their lines would sound more natural. Right away, the woman agreed. She was more than happy to help, and she was also excited because things between her and this guy had been going really well. They'd been in a long-distance relationship for a few months now, and in fact, they were getting ready to take things to the next level. The man was supposed to be visiting Colombia in the next couple of weeks, and they were going to get to see each other for the first time in person. However, that meeting would never actually happen. You see, just a few days after all of this, the woman's mother came to her with some very disturbing news. That's when she learned that not only was this guy who she'd been speaking to not at all who she thought he was, there was a completely different and much more sinister reason behind that strange favor he had asked her for. As always, my name is Nigel. I run this channel with my good friend Luke, and welcome back to Crime Zone. A reminder, if you do find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories told with a mysterious and suspenseful vibe. One other thing that I wanted to give you all a quick heads up about is that while today's story is not unsolved, it is technically incomplete. We decided to cover it though because we've been following it since the very beginning, and because for reasons that will become clear as we get further in, the final pieces of this case likely won't be resolved anytime soon. And unfortunately, might never be. With that out of the way, let's dive in. On the evening of February 2nd, 2024, a woman named Sana Ramo was feeling relieved. She'd just gotten off the phone with one of her best friends, 40-year-old Ana Knezevich, and she was glad to hear that Ana seemed to be in really good spirits. Now, Ana was normally a very happy and upbeat person. She had plenty of reasons to be, too. She was incredibly accomplished and driven, and she'd done really well for herself in life. But for the last little while, she'd been going through a tough time. After 13 years, she and her husband David had decided to end their marriage. Understandably, the end of a long relationship like this is difficult for anyone. But what had made it especially hard in this case was that there had been a lot of back and forth to get here. Ana and David had really tried everything they could think of to make things work, but it hadn't gone the way that they had hoped. They were still technically only separated. They hadn't hired lawyers or anything, but as of a few months ago, they were now sure that they were going ahead with a divorce. Making the situation even more complicated is that Ana and David weren't just husband and wife. They were also business partners. In addition to renting out a bunch of properties they owned near their home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, they also ran a company together. The company was called EOX Technology Solutions, and they specialized in providing IT support and services to small and medium-sized businesses. So yeah, there was no easy way for the couple to disentangle their lives, and it was clear that this had been weighing on Ana. Since about that previous summer, when things had really started breaking down in her marriage, she'd been anxious and withdrawn. For Sana, it was difficult to see her friend like this. The Ana she knew was this very vibrant and self-assured powerhouse of a woman. She loved adventure and travel, and she wasn't afraid to go after the things that she was passionate about. Of course, I began all of this by saying that Ana was in good spirits, and that's because recently things had started to turn a corner for her. A major reason for this was that she had decided to make a big change. At the end of December, so about 5 weeks earlier, she had picked up and moved to Spain. Now, that might sound like a pretty huge undertaking, and it was, but it's also worth pointing out that this was not the first time Ana had uprooted her life like this. She was originally from Colombia, but had immigrated to the United States when she was in her early 20s. So not only was she pretty experienced in terms of what it meant to start over in a different country, she was also a native Spanish speaker. Though Ana had only been in Spain for a short time, Sana could tell that it was exactly what her friend needed. During their phone call, Ana was telling her about all the stuff that she had been up to lately. She had temporarily rented this cute little apartment in a building in the capital of Madrid. The apartment was in the Salamanca district, which is a very affluent part of the city known for its fine dining, shopping boutiques, and historic architecture. Ana was still in the process of getting everything figured out. She told Sana the lease on her short-term rental was almost up, and she was still trying to find a permanent place to live. But overall, she sounded very optimistic and positive. She was seeing all of these different potential properties, she was getting a feel for her new home, and there was so much to do and explore. There was another reason that Sana was excited about all of this, and that's because she was going to be visiting Ana very soon. Sana also lived in Fort Lauderdale, but was supposed to fly into Madrid on February 8th. During their phone call, she and Ana had been discussing their plans and just talking about all of the things they were looking forward to doing together. So, yeah, this was great news. It seemed like Ana had finally gotten her spark back. And when Sana went to bed that night, she was feeling really good about their conversation. Unfortunately, though, her sense of relief would not last for very long. The following afternoon, so February 3rd, 2024, Sana got a notification on WhatsApp. When she opened it up, she saw that she had 2 unread messages from Ana. Here's what those messages said. Quote, "I met someone wonderful. He has a summer house about 2 hours from Madrid. We are going there now, and I will spend a few days there. Signal is spotty. I'll call you when I get back. Yesterday, after therapy, I needed a walk, and he approached me on the street. Amazing connection, like I never had before." Sana read and reread these texts over and over again, but no matter how many times she did, she was still incredibly confused. She was thinking to herself, what about our plans? I'm supposed to be going there in just a few days, and we just talked about everything last night. Is she actually going to be free, or is this her way of telling me she's changed her mind? Sana messaged Ana back immediately expressing some of these concerns, but she didn't hear anything back. And the more she thought about all of this over the next few hours, the more she began to feel like something was really wrong. For starters, Ana had never done anything like this to her before. They had traveled a lot together, and she wasn't the kind of person to abruptly change plans like this. Also, for as adventurous as Ana was, she wasn't irresponsible or impulsive. So the idea that she'd just run off with a guy she'd randomly met seemed very out of character for her. Not to mention that if this mystery man was really so wonderful, why hadn't Ana said anything about him when they had spoken last night? Things only got more alarming when Sana got in contact with some of Ana's family members, and she learned that she wasn't the only one who was worried. In fact, a number of people close to Ana had received strange WhatsApp messages from her phone that day. This included Ana's younger brother, Felipe. The texts he had gotten were nearly identical to the ones that Sana had been sent, only his were in Spanish. Speaking of which, this had caused him to notice other red flags. You see, despite Spanish being Ana's first language, these texts didn't read like that. They were strangely worded and kind of clunky. To Felipe, it didn't sound like his sister at all. To him, it felt more like something that would have been spit out by Google Translate. At this point, everyone was beginning to get really freaked out. They had no idea what was going on, and they were trying to stay calm, but Ana still wasn't responding to anyone. So they decided to contact authorities in Spain. Around the same time, Sana was able to get in touch with some of Ana's friends that she had made during prior trips to Madrid. They also began reaching out to law enforcement and expressing their concerns. Ana's loved ones were initially hopeful when the next day, February 4th, it was agreed that a welfare check would be conducted at her apartment. However, this hope soon turned to frustration. When authorities entered Ana's place, they didn't really find anything all that noteworthy. The apartment was locked from the outside, there were no signs of forced entry or any kind of struggle, and the vast majority of her stuff was still there. The only major exceptions were Ana's phone, her laptop, and her chargers. They were all missing. And of course, Ana herself, she was nowhere to be found. Understandably, this only added to the uneasiness of the whole situation. But as adamant as Ana's loved ones were that something was wrong, because there were no clear indications that a crime had been committed, there wasn't much that police could do. You know, for all they knew, she really was just off with some mystery guy she'd met and had bad cell service, and she'd be back in a couple of days. It wasn't until another day had passed, so February 5th, that the case really started to be taken seriously. That's because it turned out that Sana wasn't the only person who had plans with Ana during this period. Before she disappeared, Ana had been planning to attend a conference with another friend in Barcelona. The conference was supposed to begin that day, which was a Monday, but Ana never showed. Again, this was something that was wildly out of character for her. Ana and this friend had been looking forward to this event for quite a while, so for her to ditch without even letting them know was very hard to believe. Partly for this reason, Ana was officially reported as missing. And because she was an American citizen, the FBI quickly came on as well to assist Spanish authorities with the case. It probably won't surprise you to find out that when a proper investigation was launched, one of the first people that was looked at was Ana's estranged husband, David Knezevich. This was especially true after some of Ana's family members went to police and gave them a more detailed picture of their marriage, specifically of their impending divorce. According to Ana's brother Felipe, while a lot of Ana's friends knew that she had been having a tough time with the end of her marriage, there was more to the story. He claimed that things had been getting really nasty between her and David about how they were going to split up their assets. In addition to the IT business, the two of them owned a sizable real estate portfolio worth several $1,000,000. And even though they had acquired this property together and had worked on and built the business together, David seemed to think that he was entitled to the lion's share. He wanted 75% of everything they had and felt that Ana should be happy with 25%. Felipe explained that this was a big part of why Ana ended up moving to Spain. Yes, she loved it there and was looking for a fresh start, but she also just wanted to be as far away from David as possible. Obviously, this didn't look great for David, but when police contacted him, he insisted that the split between him and Ana was amicable. He said that when he learned she was missing, he was just as concerned as everyone else, but he hadn't really been involved in her life much lately, so he didn't know what was going on. In fact, he said he'd been doing some traveling of his own. David was originally from Serbia, and he'd headed there to visit family on January 27th. Police were able to confirm David's flight details, and they spoke with some of his family members who said that he'd been there ever since. With David seemingly ruled out, police began looking into other possibilities. They learned that Ana had been on the dating and friend-finding app Bumble before her disappearance, and they wondered if maybe she had met someone there who could explain her absence. They were able to track down at least 2 men whom she was speaking to at the time she went missing, but it soon became clear that neither of them knew anything. They had only been talking to Ana casually, and they hadn't seen her on or after February 2nd. Investigators likewise tried digging further into the possibility that Ana genuinely had met someone and was staying at their home, just like the mysterious WhatsApp messages said, but this also proved to be a dead end. There was almost no actual information in the messages to go off of, and Ana's phone was no longer active, so it couldn't be traced. Just as authorities seemed to be coming up empty-handed everywhere, though, they would get a major break. It was a lead that would finally start to explain what was going on here, but unfortunately, it wasn't the kind of development that anyone was hoping for. A couple of days into the investigation, Spanish police were contacted by some of Ana Knezevich's loved ones. They told them, "We've come across something pretty unsettling, and we think that you need to come and take a look at it immediately." This thing that the loved ones were referring to was surveillance video that had been recorded in the lobby of Ana's apartment building. And as it turned out, the footage was nothing short of chilling. As police reviewed the video, they could see that Ana had returned to her apartment at around 2:30 p.m. on February 2nd. After that, she was never seen leaving again. Well, at least not officially anyway. You see, several hours later, a man was captured by the building's surveillance cameras acting incredibly suspiciously. He was dressed in a mostly dark outfit, he was wearing a white motorcycle helmet, and there was a mask covering the majority of his face. He was carrying 2 rolls of duct tape, as well as a can of black spray paint. The unknown man waited outside until around 9:30 p.m., when 2 people exited. As they did, he immediately seized this opportunity to make his way into the building. Once inside, the man used the duct tape he had with him to cover part of the door frame so that the lock would no longer engage. He then spray painted 2 cameras in the lobby, one above the elevator and another on the property's intercom system. While this was clearly done in an attempt to cover the lenses, the man hadn't been fully successful. The view of the camera above the elevator in particular had only been partially obscured. That's how police were able to see the final and most unnerving part of this whole thing. After heading upstairs to where the residences were and spending approximately an hour there, the man was captured one final time as he left the building. Only when he got off the elevator, he now had a large and heavy-looking suitcase that he hadn't brought in with him before. You might be asking yourself, why did it take so long to find this footage? It's a good question, and unfortunately it's one we don't really have a definitive answer to. That being said, from the sources we've come across, it seems that police were kind of limited in terms of what they had access to at the beginning of the investigation into Ana's disappearance. At least one article we read stated that authorities had been denied a bunch of warrants they applied for, largely on the basis of what I touched on before, which is that initially there was no evidence that a crime had been committed. In fact, it sounds like the way investigators got their hands on the surveillance video was a total fluke. It apparently happened after some of Ana's friends went to her apartment trying to find out more information about what was going on, and they were told by building staff about the spray painting of the cameras. It seems the staff had not connected the vandalism of the cameras to Ana's missing persons case. Of course, when police, as well as Ana's friends and family, heard about this, right away they knew that this was no coincidence. They were certain that the man in the video was responsible for Ana's disappearance. And as much as they didn't want to believe it, they knew there was a good possibility that Ana had been inside that suitcase they had seen in the surveillance footage. Sadly, things were about to get even darker, because despite the attempts the suspect had made at concealing his identity, people close to Ana were positive that they knew who he was. They told police that they were sure that the man in the video was David Knezevich. Now, you might be saying, wait, I thought David was in Serbia. Didn't police confirm that? Well, yeah, sort of. David definitely had flown to visit his family on January 27th, and he had been there as well by the time police reached out to him on February 5th. However, as they were about to learn, there was a lot of time in between these two dates where David's whereabouts didn't seem to line up with what he had told investigators. And over the next couple of months, as they began a deep dive into his activities, not only would his seemingly ironclad alibi completely fall apart, what would emerge was an absolutely stunning and disturbing timeline. Here's what they were able to piece together. On January 29th, 2024, so 2 days after he arrived in Serbia, David rented a Peugeot 308 from a rental car company in Belgrade. That car wouldn't be returned until more than 6 weeks later, and when it finally was, it had tinted windows and a different license plate holder. Most interesting of all, though, it now had 4,800 additional miles on it. It turned out that in the days leading up to Ana's disappearance, David had made the more than 1,600-mile drive from Belgrade to Madrid. Now, Europe is a pretty small continent, relatively speaking, but to put that in perspective, that's like someone traveling from New York City to Miami, Florida, then driving another 300 miles. And that's just one way. We know this because the Peugeot was captured at numerous toll booths and vehicle checkpoints during this journey. Except, once arriving in Spain, the vehicle's license plates had been swapped out, specifically with plates that had been stolen in Madrid during this time frame. As it turned out, those stolen license plates were scanned multiple times too by automated readers, and the locations they were logged turned out to be pretty important. One of them was a motorcycle shop where a man had purchased an identical helmet to the one seen in that surveillance video at Ana's apartment. Another spot the stolen plates had been seen were on the street where the apartment building is located. Speaking of the surveillance video, the motorcycle helmet wasn't the only thing in the footage that authorities were able to link directly to David Knezevich. When they started looking into the brand of spray paint that had been used to cover the cameras, they were led to a local hardware store. As it happened, they had surveillance cameras as well, ones that showed David buying the spray paint and the duct tape as plain as day on February 2nd, just hours before Ana was last seen. If that already sounds pretty damning, well, hang on, because that's just the tip of the iceberg. While looking into David's finances, authorities learned that in both the lead up to and aftermath of Ana going missing, David had been liquidating huge amounts of their real estate portfolio. He'd sold about $6 million worth of property and had been trying to do some other very shady things when it came to Ana's finances as well. A woman who worked for the couple told investigators that David had tried to get her to impersonate Ana following her disappearance. The woman said that David had given her Ana's social security number and wanted her to call a bank and open a new account under her name. He had likewise instructed her to call an insurance company and begin canceling several policies on vehicles related to their business. The woman said that when she told David she felt uncomfortable, he replied that this needed to be done in order for employees to get paid. He also said, quote, "I cannot call with my voice because I sound like a guy." Perhaps the most unsettling tip of all, though, came from a woman in Colombia who contacted authorities saying that she had some information for them. This is the same woman who I told you about at the very beginning of this video. We don't know this woman's name because she's only identified as Individual 1 in court documents, but to make things easier for the purposes of this explanation, I'm going to be referring to her as Maria. So Maria told investigators that she met David Knezevich through a dating app back in October of 2023. They had mostly been chatting and flirting, but in February of 2024, he reached out to her asking for a favor. David said that he needed help with some Spanish translation. He said that he had this friend who was a female writer in Serbia and she was working on a movie script. He claimed that there was a minor character in the movie that was Colombian, and this friend needed some help with the dialogue. In David's words, he needed her to translate some stuff in English into, quote, perfect Colombian. Maria said that she was more than happy to help, but she warned David, I don't really speak English though. He told her that was fine, and he pre-ran what he was sending her through Google Translate, telling her just to do her best to fix it up a little. Now, at the time, Maria didn't think anything of this. It wasn't until a little while later, when her mom got curious about this guy she was talking to from Serbia and looked him up, that she discovered David's wife, Ana, was missing. Understandably, this made Maria really nervous, but what really freaked her out was when she and her mom started reading more media reports and came across those WhatsApp messages that Ana's friends and family received following her disappearance. Those messages were word for word the text that David had asked Maria to translate for him. So yeah, it turned out Ana's brother Felipe had been almost exactly right about the messages. They were janky because they had been double translated, and the writer of the texts, David Knezevich, was not a native Spanish speaker. The timing of the conversations with Maria was also pretty damning. David had asked her for this favor sometime between February 2nd and 3rd. In other words, right before Ana's friends and family received the messages. After putting all of these details together, authorities kept tabs on David and waited for him to board a flight back to the United States. He finally did, almost 3 months to the day that Ana had gone missing, and was arrested at Miami International Airport on May 4th. Of course, even with all of the evidence that Spanish police and the FBI had collected, there were still many unanswered questions. The most pressing of these, obviously, were where was Ana and what had happened to her? Much to the frustration of authorities and Ana's loved ones, though, David completely refused to cooperate with the investigation. He claimed he hadn't done anything wrong and that he was totally innocent. Investigators came to a much darker conclusion. They alleged that David had killed Ana and had disposed of her body somewhere along his return trip to Serbia. They theorized that he had done so because he did not want to split assets with Ana during the divorce. David was initially charged with kidnapping, but these charges were later upgraded to include murder. It looked like even without his cooperation, authorities had a strong circumstantial case against him. However, as I hinted at the start of this video, this story has an incomplete ending. On April 28, 2025, David Knezevich was found unresponsive in his jail cell at the Federal Detention Center in Miami, where he was being held since last year. Emergency responders attempted life-saving measures, but they were ultimately unsuccessful, and he was pronounced dead that same morning. Right now, because all of this is so recent, not a ton of information has been released about what happened. The whole thing is still being investigated by the FBI, though officials have alleged that David took his own life. As you might imagine, this news came as a huge blow to the friends and family members of Ana Knezevich. David's trial was scheduled to begin next month at the time of this recording. So not only will they now not get to face the man allegedly responsible for her murder in court, but the chances of ever recovering Anna's remains have now been seriously diminished. In a statement released through the family's attorney last week, they wrote in part, quote, "The death of Anna's murderer closes a painful chapter in our lives, previously filled with the dread that he might not face justice. Now we may never know where he put Anna's body. It is a cruel final insult that we may never recover Anna's remains or know the full extent of the betrayal she suffered." In other interviews, loved ones, especially Anna's brother Felipe, said that their main focus now is going to be doing whatever they can to try and find Ana so that they can properly mourn her loss. And their hope is that without the looming trial, authorities will be able to dedicate more of their time and resources to this mission. As far as that goes, it seems that searches have been done in the past, and investigators seem to have some idea as to where to direct their attention. In the summer of last year, they spent a significant amount of time in a wooded area in the city of Vicenza, Italy, after GPS data from David's rental car showed he'd made a detour there on his journey from Madrid back to Serbia. Nothing was ultimately found during that search, though there are still hopes that future efforts may turn up more. Another thing to look out for is whether police turn their attention to some of David Knezevich's family members. A number of sources we came across in our research mentioned that authorities were investigating some of his relatives, especially his brother, on suspicion that they may have aided David following Anna's alleged kidnapping and murder. Perhaps, at the very least, some of these people know something that could help to bring Anna's friends and family some much-needed closure. All of this is to say that it's not clear where the case will go from here, but I very much hope that this is not where the story ends. If there's any sense of justice that can be delivered here, and I'm not sure that there is, it can only come after the remaining secrets in this case see the light of day. Until that day comes, though, all we can do is pass on our deepest condolences to Anna's loved ones and wish them the best as they continue to wait for the answers that they deserve.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously. Thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.